By the summer of 1941, Adolf Hitler stood at the peak of his power. He controlled a vast European empire and commanded a level of global fear that seemed absolute. Yet, as the war in the East progressed, the German High Command became increasingly preoccupied with a single enemy commander. Intelligence reports began to track his movements with a level of detail usually reserved for entire armies. This focus eventually forced the rewriting of Nazi military strategies. Major offensives were launched with the primary objective of eliminating this one man before his defensive preparations could take hold. This rival represented resilience, a concept the German war machine had not yet found a way to conquer. The test of that resilience began with Operation Barbarossa. In June 1941, Hitler launched the largest military invasion in history, sending 3 million soldiers and thousands of tanks across the Soviet border. Early victories were devastating. Millions of Soviet troops were captured in massive encirclements, leading many international observers to predict a swift Soviet collapse within months. These victories relied on the blitzkrieg. This doctrine used relentless forward speed to paralyze an enemy's command structure before a defense could be organized. This created a specific military puzzle. A blitzkrieg offensive is vulnerable only when it loses momentum, but very few armies on Earth were fast enough to disrupt that relentless momentum once the German tanks began to roll. Soviet survival depended on a leader who could slow the German advance before it reached the capital. That leader was Georgy Zhukov. While others in the Soviet command panicked, Zhukov remained analytical. He studied German tactics closely, looking for the specific mechanical weaknesses in their high-speed maneuvers. Zhukov recognized that the blitzkrieg required continuous speed to remain effective. To counter it, he focused his efforts on engineering friction. He moved away from traditional clashes of armies. Instead, he traded vast stretches of Soviet territory to buy the time necessary to prepare a deeper defense. This time allowed for a massive industrial relocation. Thousands of Soviet factories were dismantled and moved thousands of kilometers east, placing them beyond the reach of German bombers. Behind the front lines, millions of civilians were mobilized to dig anti-tank trenches and build fortified positions, creating a series of obstacles designed to drain the energy of the German advance. This map visualizes how Zhukov's defensive lines impacted the German advance. As fast-moving units hit these barriers, supply lines stretched and forward momentum dissipated. By the time they reached Moscow, they were overextended. The speed that won Europe had stalled. Zhukov had successfully forced a sprinting enemy into a marathon, waiting for the moment they would finally exhaust themselves. Winter arrived just as the German advance reached its limit. Temperatures dropped sharply, engines froze, and German troops found themselves without adequate winter clothing. Zhukov had kept fresh, winter-equipped divisions in reserve. He waited until the German lines were completely immobile before ordering them forward. The Soviet counteroffensive struck the frozen German lines with immense force. The mechanical momentum of the German army was shattered. This maneuver forced the German military into its first major retreat of the war, ending the belief that the blitzkrieg was unstoppable. Inside his headquarters, Hitler dismissed several of his senior generals. He began to demand victories that his overextended military could no longer deliver. The nature of the Eastern Front shifted. German commanders now had to account for Zhukov's defensive preparations and countermoves before launching any new offensive. The quick conquest Hitler had envisioned became a multi-year conflict of attrition, fought in freezing conditions that favored the defender. By neutralizing the advantage of speed, Zhukov forced Nazi Germany into a war of endurance it was not industrially equipped to win. By April 1945, the war reached its conclusion in the streets of Berlin. The city that was meant to rule a new empire was reduced to ruins. On April 30th, Hitler took his own life in an underground bunker. Within days, the regime he built signed a total surrender. Georgy Zhukov's leadership during the defense of Moscow and the final drive toward Berlin made him a central figure in the defeat of Nazi Germany. Historians have found no direct evidence that Hitler ever used the phrase "feared one man." However, The historical record shows that Zhukov was the commander who most successfully countered Hitler's primary military strategy. History is often shaped by those who refuse to surrender when defeat seems certain, using resilience and patience to wait for the moment the tide finally turns.